Welcome, everyone. My name is Richard Orme, and I'm delighted to have you join us today for another webinar hosted by the DAISY Consortium. As we count down the days until the European Accessibility Act coming into force, we're bringing you this series of webinars to help you prepare. And today we explore the topic of reading solutions. There are a vast range of options available to users when it comes to reading hardware and software, all offering unique benefits to readers, unique accessibility features, and as we'll hear from our presenters, unique challenges. We're delighted to bring you an incredible panel of presenters. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Tara Maziel from Amazon, Wendy Reed from Rakuten Kobo, and Daniel Weck from EDR Lab. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions, so do use the Q&A button in Zoom to submit them. We'll cover as many as possible towards the end of this webinar.
Hey everyone, my name is Tara Maziel and I'm from Amazon. Here at Amazon, we distribute millions of Kindle ebooks through our Kindle store, and we develop both purpose-built Kindle e-readers like the Kindle Paperwhite and Kindle Scribe, as well as free Kindle reading apps for iOS, Android, Fire Tablet, PC, and web. My role at Amazon is a product manager for accessibility, where I work with dozens of different teams across the company, primarily Kindle teams, to ensure that we are addressing the needs of our customers with disabilities and building accessible solutions that can improve the reading experience for everyone. For Kindle, we rely on our content creators to provide the ebooks that we distribute to customers. This includes big and small publishers, as well as millions of independent authors who publish their ebooks through our Kindle Direct publishing tools. Because Kindle has its own proprietary ebook format, we don't directly render EPUBs or other ebook formats to our users, which means ebooks that publishers provide to us must first go through a conversion process to turn into a Kindle ebook. To support our publishing partners in submitting accessible ebooks, we communicate best practices, such as organizing chapters and sections with a hierarchy of headings, creating well-structured tables with captions and headers, ensuring all meaningful images have text alternatives, adding self-describing titles to links, using MathML for mathematical content, defining the language or languages used within the book, avoiding the use of images for text and tables, and so on. Converting documents to our Kindle ebook format allows us to have more control over the way a book renders, and also allows us to provide some of the innovative accessibility features I'll discuss later. But it also means we need to take explicit actions to ensure we are retaining through this conversion process the rich accessibility support that the content creator has provided. To this end, we are in the process of making several updates to ensure we're maintaining the accessibility semantics of the books we ingest. For example, Kindle ebooks have historically not rendered MathML content. Instead, when books with MathML are submitted, the math is converted to an image with no alternative text, so screen reader users wouldn't even know if there was any math present on the page. The test case shown here for reading block and inline MathML from the EPUB test's fundamental accessibility tests for non-visual reading would fail on our Kindle apps. Some of our publishers have understood this limitation and resort to creating unique versions of their ebooks just for Kindle, providing images of math with associated alt text. But this isn't an ideal solution. Not only is it more work for publishers to submit unique versions of ebooks just for Amazon, but alt text can't be navigated granularly via screen reader and tends to be insufficient for reading more complex math. I'm happy to say that we've begun expanding support for MathML in Kindle, starting with our Kindle for iOS app. Now, readers using the VoiceOver screen reader with their Kindle apps can identify and navigate within the MathML, using the VoiceOver capabilities that readers are accustomed to on the web. More on Kindle reading solutions shortly.
Hi, I'm Wendy Reed. I am the Accessibility and Publishing Standards Lead at Rakuten Kobo, where I am in charge of everything to do with accessibility for all of our web, mobile apps, and hardware platforms, and some things relating to marketing and other external-facing services. In addition to that, I am also one of the co-chairs of the Publishing Maintenance Working Group at W3C, where we maintain the EPUB 3 and audiobook standards. But today I'm going to be talking about reading systems and how we factor accessibility into the ingestion and display of ebook content. So first, I want to talk a bit about content that comes into Kobo, what we do with it, and some things that we would love to see from publishers in order to ensure that the content that we receive is as accessible and usable as possible. First, upon ingestion, all books that come into Kobo are processed through EPUB check. which allows us to validate the content and check for any major errors. In addition to that, we also you might have heard the term KeyPub, KeyPubify the books by adding some additional code to allow us to do very accurate reading position calculation and annotations positioning calculations. This doesn't change anything about the rendering of the books. It only provides some additional code so that the reading systems can provide the most accurate positioning possible for user benefit. I spoke to our publisher operations team to get an idea of the things that they would like to see from the content that comes into our system. And they gave me a pretty well-rounded list. Some of this may not sound like it's related to accessibility, but so much about how content renders and its availability and usability impacts accessibility in the long run. So it all matters. The first thing that we ask for our publishers to do, if you're not doing it already, is to test your content. Run your books through EPUB Check, run your books through Ace by Daisy, run your books on devices before you send them out. It doesn't need to be using Kobo's apps or anything like that, but having your books checked against different screen sizes, making sure that you have it looks good on a desktop, it looks good on a tablet, it looks good on a phone. This is going to be important for users as they interact with your content. We recommend that you design for flexibility. Make sure that any formatting or design that you're putting into your books, as beautiful as it might look on your computer screen, is it going to look just as good on a iPhone mini with the font size bumped up 20%. So many users adjust their font settings when they read books to make them more comfortable and usable for them. We don't want to lose the usability of the book because of really strict formatting or formatting that doesn't take into account these differences. Another recommendation is actually to separate out the files in your book at the chapter level or section level. Smaller files actually help improve rendering speed. And most reading systems, especially lower fidelity or lower end systems. And it improves navigability because there's more in the table of contents for users to navigate to. We also recommend you right size your images. What we often see is either images being really low quality to preserve file size, or images being really, really high quality because the publishers have sent us their print originals. This is wonderful. We love to see your beautiful images. But especially when it comes to the files that are delivered as print originals, we don't need 600 DPI print ready versions of the files. What we really need are high quality files that are reasonably sized, because the more images that are in your book, the larger the EPUB gets, the more difficult it is to download. And at a certain threshold, the file quality doesn't make much difference in the book. So please don't deliver us your print originals. For books that have special characters or may use languages or that have unusual scripts or uncommon scripts, we recommend embedding fonts. This allows for ultimate renderability and ensuring that there's no characters that are missing in the book, which may create an interesting reading experience should they not be supported. We also ask, please don't use non-ASCII characters in your file names. Non-ASCII characters are anything like non-alphanumeric or characters, special characters. Just don't use them. Keep your file names to letters, numbers, dashes. Anytime we run into a book that has these non-ASCII characters in the file name, it tends to cause some pretty interesting problems, and sometimes those are not always predictable. And the last one is EPUB 3, please. We don't need EPUB 2 files any longer. EPUB 3 is super well supported. It is really stable. Please use EPUB 3. Please send us EPUB 3 files. For reading solutions, to talk a little bit about our platform, having reading solutions on multiple platforms for us is essential to meeting user needs and preferences. What we found is that a lot of users have different behaviors and use different platforms throughout the day. And this is for a variety of reasons. But we want to be there for the reader wherever they happen to be. So we have users that read on desktop during the day and then switch over to maybe their phone or dedicated e-reading device in the evenings. It all depends on their preferences, but you need to have those platforms there to meet those preferences.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Vec. I'm a software engineer and I work with the DAISY Consortium and the European Digital Reading Lab, or EDR Lab. My field of expertise is digital publishing and accessible multimedia, and my professional journey includes contributions at the Regium Foundation, as well as participating in standardization efforts led by the IDPF and the W3C, notably SMILE, CSS, and EPUB. Over the years, I've been involved in several key areas of digital publishing, such as authoring tools, format converters, content validation, accessibility evaluation, online distribution, but in this presentation I will share my experience designing and implementing accessible reading systems. More specifically, I will talk about Thorium, which is a free reading solution built with open source software created and maintained by EDR Lab. Thorium is a cross-platform application for traditional desktop operating systems, Windows, Mac, and Linux. Here I use the term desktop to differentiate mobile hardware devices such as smartphones and tablets, which typically run Apple iOS and Google Android. From a developer's perspective, this technical classification is useful, but nowadays, from a user standpoint, the desktop versus mobile distinction is confusing because it does not reflect how we interact with modern technology to access information. For example, there are computers that have touchscreens, there are hybrid laptops that have detachable keyboards and offer a standalone tablet form factor. There are tablets that dock into keyboards, making them look and feel like traditional laptops. There are even smartphones that connect to external displays and switch to a desktop-like environment. So, although this introduces some design and usability challenges, this also provides creative opportunities to implement accessible user experiences.
As mentioned in the prior segment, Kindle doesn't simply render HTML content like some other reading systems. So when I talked about how we are now using VoiceOver's capabilities to read and navigate math content on our Kindle apps, I should mention that this wasn't a straightforward process. To do this, we had to rely on our previously built custom layer of accessibility support, which is essentially a bridge between Kindle's native code and the operating system. In some cases, the APIs that support certain kinds of accessible navigation or functionality aren't available publicly, and we either have to find workarounds to make things functional from our end or work directly with the owners of the assistive technology to develop solutions for customers. Based on the capabilities of the operating system and its associated assistive technology, our Kindle ebook reading experience can vary across devices. For example, for iOS, we were able to expose the math content in our Kindle books and let VoiceOver handle the announcement and navigation. But on Android, for example, the TalkBack screen reader doesn't currently support MathML. So we have to get creative and look to other solutions for ensuring that MathML content can be made accessible within our Kindle app.
When it comes to accessibility, building for these platforms and these different frameworks offers a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges. Each platform has different considerations when it comes to accessibility. When it comes to platforms like iOS, Android, the web, there's a lot of existing APIs that we can make use of, a lot of existing interaction patterns and user preferences that are already there. Users who use their phone all the time and use AT on their phones, they have ways they like to do things. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to do something revolutionary. We can just follow what they already prefer. When it comes to the hardware side, it's a little more challenging because what we can do depends on our underlying software architecture, what tools are available out there for our underlying software architecture. And we're working in a smaller ecosystem. Oftentimes, as many of us are building reading solutions, we can look at other reading solutions for guidance or, interesting ways they're doing things. It's a little harder on the hardware side. There are other places to look, but it does mean that, it's a smaller group of people. It's a smaller thing to compare against. And in some cases, there is no comparison to the experience.
From the very start of the project, one of Thorium's core objectives has been to meet the needs of users with diverse abilities and preferences by combining visual, auditory, and touch experiences, eyes, ears, and fingers. For example, Thorium allows users to override authored publisher styles by customizing color themes, text spacing, font face, etc. Users can disable animations to reduce the risk of motion sickness. The keyboard shortcuts are configurable. Thorium offers a text-to-speech read-aloud feature with sentence-level and word-level highlighting. Users can listen to pre-recorded audiobooks, and there is support for books with synchronized text and audio. While reading or listening, users can choose to automatically skip footnotes, extended image descriptions, or page breaks. Users can follow links into the table of content or other authored navigation structures like page list and landmarks to jump across publication resources. In fact, the Find Text feature can be used during a reading or listening activity, and users can navigate search results in a visual or non-visual manner. There are several examples of complex interactions, but one that stands out is bookmarking and annotating content, which requires switching context between publication documents, where a text selection is made, and the application user interface, where the notes are added and edited, all the while preserving the reading position.
When it comes to building reading systems and making reading systems accessible, one of the things that I think more people should understand is that reading system accessibility is complex and there's a lot of layers to it. So when we think about the reading system, we say system for a reason because it's made up of many parts. Just think of kind of the average reading application. When you first open the application, you have this kind of application experience. It could be the library, it could be a browsing experience, looking for your next read, or looking through the books that you already have downloaded. You have that initial layer. Once you've found the book that you want to read and you go to open it, there's a process that happens in the background that most users probably don't see. But that opening process is actually really important because on the reading system side, we're looking at what type of book this is, what display properties does it have, what do we need to do to populate the reading experience to make it the best possible experience for users. And then that final layer, and this initially, is the reading experience itself. The reading experience introduces even more complexity because there's layers within that too. When we look at the reading experience, the first thing you'll see and think about is the book content, which is often rendered in a web view. And it contains the entirety of the book content, which already has a lot of complexity. You have to consider the different parts of the text, images, potentially interactive components, whether this book is fixed layout or reflowable. On top of that, when you're in a reading experience, almost all users have some pretty significant expectations in terms of their control over the reading experience, which introduces the menu overlay. The menu overlay, which gives you options like reading settings, navigation, brightness, all of these things that you want to control within the reading experience, that sits on top of the book content and, has to be interactive and usable, through a number of different means. And then, in addition to all of that, is the surrounding content to an ebook. This is stuff like the table of contents, annotations, any, maybe supplements to the book that are not part of the main book content. All of these things need to be accessible. All of these things need to be accessible to each other. We need to be able to carry information back and forth oftentimes. And we want to make sure the user is always able to kind of move between these different layers seamlessly and without too much difficulty. So when you're reading the book content, you want to open the menu. Can you easily open the menu? Can you navigate the menu, do what you need to do, and go right back to the book content without too much fuss? This is a real challenge when you're trying to deal with assistive technologies and these different layers and applications. It's not impossible, but it just takes a lot of planning and consideration.
When developing our Kindle reading apps across different operating systems and device types, it's important to lean into patterns that are familiar to the user versus rigidly creating a consistent user interface for the app. For example, you might notice differences when comparing the user interface of the Kindle library context menus on iOS versus Android. And this is also how we approach building support for accessible MathML. That is, to create a more intuitive customer experience, we are letting the device-level assistive technology handle the reading of math content, rather than building a custom Kindle solution that's identical across devices. It can also be faster and easier to leverage assistive technologies that are more within our control, which can result in unique features available on different devices. For example, for our Fire tablets, we were able to collaborate with Amazon's device accessibility team to ensure that users of Switch Access on Fire tablets can use their switches to turn the pages of a Kindle book. We also provide an option for both Android and Fire tablet users to turn pages via the volume buttons on their device, something not possible for iOS at this time. Then again, sometimes the device type can make it more challenging to achieve the desired functionality. For example, while our VoiceView screen reader available with Fire tablets includes a robust set of gestures that can be used to read Kindle ebooks and navigate the app, using VoiceView with our e-readers is a bit different. While Fire tablets respond to 2, 3, and even 4-finger VoiceView gestures, our e-readers only support 2-finger gestures today. So there is a more simplified set of actions that can be taken while navigating a Kindle book on an e-reader. We are continuing to look for ways to align and close the accessibility gaps that exist across our supported devices. But sometimes it also makes more sense to build a custom solution that's consistent across the different apps and devices we support. And this is how we approach developing the Assistive Reader, the text-to-speech-based Read Aloud feature we launched for the Kindle apps earlier this year. Today, iOS, Android, and Fire tablets each offer their own text-to-speech options, and of course, there are many third-party tools that can be used across desktop and mobile web. We first considered leveraging these options in Kindle to address our many customer requests to support Read Aloud. For example, iOS's text-to-speech tool called SpeakScreen will read out loud the text and provide synchronized highlighting. It is designed to be app-agnostic, providing a consistent experience across the device. However, we would need to do custom work in Kindle to support the synchronized highlighting portion of this feature, and we'd still be limited to what the Apple developers decided to build in the future. Knowing that Kindle books are a unique format and that long-form reading is so personal, we didn't want to rely on a generic tool that might not meet all our customers' specific needs, either now or in the future. So we decided to leverage the same underlying text-to-speech engines, but build our own unique user interface for Kindle's Read Aloud feature, which currently includes optional synchronized word-by-word highlighting, speed controls, and rewind capabilities, with room for future enhancements that can further improve readability. This creates a consistent user interface with controls in the same locations within our apps for all audio content, making it a more seamless experience for customers who enable the Assistive Reader for accessible access to their ebooks, but who also choose to purchase Audible audiobooks to consume content in that way. Since its launch earlier this year, we're excited to see so many readers making use of this feature and letting us know how it's transformed their reading habits.
Screen reader users depend on keyboard interaction, but there are many sighted users who simply prefer to navigate the graphical interface using keystrokes instead of operating a pointing device like a mouse or a trackpad. During development, we quickly realized that good keyboard support for sighted users does not automatically translate to good screen reader experience. Because in order to perceive the information displayed on the screen, visually impaired users require much finer keyboard control with simultaneous auditory feedback. The level of detail is not immediately apparent to the uninitiated user interface designer or software engineer. In fact, sighted developers can learn how to use a screen reader, and this undoubtedly benefits the team. But it is clear that people with disabilities who actually rely on assistive technology must be actively involved during testing. They should in fact be central to the design and implementation phases of the project. Another lesson we learned is that the various screen readers available for different operating systems do not necessarily behave consistently. Despite existing interoperability standards, an application feature which works with one screen reader may not work as well with another screen reader, due to slightly different interpretations or sometimes just software bugs. There is also the potential issue of the application's keyboard shortcuts colliding with the screen reader's own keystrokes. So it really is important to include expertise for all supported screen readers.
When it comes to assistive technology, there's a lot of options out there, and there's a lot of different assistive technologies. There are software-based ones, there are hardware-based ones. There are creative ways that people have come up with to make their devices and applications work for them. And it's sometimes a bit overwhelming to think about all the different ways that people use tools. At Kobo, we test with a wide variety of assistive technologies, but we put special focus right now on screen readers, keyboard, and magnification. Our goal here is to try and emphasize making essential functionality work before we start to optimize for very specific use cases. This is not to say that we don't think about more specific use cases or use cases outside of these, but just that we're focusing here, trying to get it right so that we can then put even more focus into the other areas. Going forwards, we really want to focus on things like braille displays, switch control, voice control, all of these kind of different methods of interaction. The other thing I want to say about assistive technology is that we have a strict no analytics approach for assistive technology. We don't track AT usage in any of our products, even though people like to ask. In kind of modern product development, it's very common to want data, and data can be incredibly useful for making good product development decisions. But we have to be mindful about things like user privacy. And we've decided that AT is a pretty high risk for user privacy, and we don't want to infringe on privacy in any way. So we just don't track the usage of AT. We do other things instead, like user testing.
Now let's move on to another piece of the puzzle, the operating system. As previously mentioned, users can personalize text formatting in Thorium. But users can also configure display preferences at the level of the OS, the operating system. There are differences between Windows, Mac, and Linux in how dark and light modes are implemented. For example, whether the color theme applies to all or only parts of the user interface. Additionally, Windows supports individual high contrast styles, which Thorium could, in principle, detect and apply to both the user interface and the publication HTML documents. Now, note that this is not currently supported, but it is on our to-do list. In Thorium, these types of system-specific features are challenging because the application is generally designed to look and feel identical across all platforms. In reality, special adaptations that enable deeper integration with operating systems can not only improve the user experience, but in some cases, they can unlock accessibility-related functionality. Besides color themes, OS-level native services may include things like notifications, background audio playback, spell checking, dictionary, text-to-speech, and many other things.
For Kindle, developing an accessible reading system has unique challenges that differ from developing an accessible web page or non-reading focused mobile app. Sure, there are the obvious requirements to be met in the user interface or the ebook content itself. But there's also the fact that reading is very personal and something that people, regardless of disability, can struggle with at one time or another. Our investments and priorities at Kindle are based on a solid understanding of our customers and their needs, which we glean through ongoing voice of customer insights and targeted research with our customers with disabilities. People with dyslexia and other reading-related disabilities are one of the user groups most impacted by a reading system that doesn't provide enough support. Readers with dyslexia, for example, struggle with connecting sounds of words to their visual counterparts and can easily become fatigued because they're spending so much time focused on decoding unfamiliar words rather than comprehending the text. Reading slowly and while fatigued makes it even easier to get distracted or veer off track while reading line to line. To support the needs of these readers, we offer features that can limit distractions, improve focus and tracking, and reduce eye strain. Our features allow users to customize the text and layout, understand difficult vocabulary, or consume the text through multiple sensory channels. Prior to launching the Assistive Reader, we heard from many people who said that reading on Kindle was altogether prohibitive if they didn't have a way to follow along in the text with audio. Of course, the needs of people with disabilities vary greatly, and what works for some readers can be a hindrance to others. For example, some of our readers can read significantly more content and for a longer period of time when using the Open Dyslexic font, a black background to reduce eye strain, wide line spacing to improve readability, and the colored overlay of the Kindle Reading Ruler to stay focused line by line. Whereas for others, doing any of these things might make reading even more difficult.
To get into user testing, we have seen nothing but benefits from doing user testing. User testing has been the most informative way for us to understand the impact of the efforts that we've been making and helping us decide on new features and approaches to existing features. If I were to give any advice about user testing or share our biggest takeaways, I would say that the two things we've taken away most are to give users options Everyone wants to customize their reading experience and they want to have as much control as they possibly can. The other one is that no disability group is a monolith. You can talk to two people who on paper have the same disability, use the same assistive technology, same computer, and they're going to give you two completely different perspectives on how they use that technology, how they experience their disability, and what they want out of a product. This is true for all users, but I think it is often very easy to make assumptions or say, oh, we talked to this user who has this profile. We've done it. And that's just not the case. You really do need to talk to a variety of users and kind of find the places where either you can add options to make things more customizable or create ways to make things flexible enough that two users with completely different desires are going to both be happy with the final result. I put some quotes here from recent tests that we've done. In a user interview about annotations, the tester told us, I've seen a lot of people make attempts at ways to make footnotes using audible beacons and things. That seems like a great idea, but in practice, it just gets kind of chaotic. It was a user talking about annotations in a test about some web usability features and like experience on our site. The user told us that the issue with the sort by dropdown is that we have a lot of different elements that appear to me to be in a very random order. I'm a big fan of alphabetical order. Never even thought about that for dropdown menus. And in an interview we did about e-reading and using e-reading applications, a user told us, I'm always looking for efficiencies. If I want to read a book, I don't want to have to jump through a bunch of hoops to choose the book that I want to read. Which is fair, it's if you just want to get reading, no one wants to, go to a library, go to another list, go to a third list, and try to find the book they're looking for. They just want to read. And users oftentimes want the same things, but they just may want them in different ways. User testing has been incredibly impactful for us. And I can't wait to do more because it's always an interesting practice every single time. But in the end of the day, it's a huge help for us as we try to make products more accessible.
Here are my closing remarks. Accessibility must be a core vertical concern, not an afterthought. Best practice and standards are essential. Follow them for content production and for product design. People with disabilities are the assistive technology experts. Invest in them. They must be included in the process of designing, implementing, and testing accessible products and services. Thank you.
I'll end today's presentation with 4 key recommendations for creating an accessible reading solution. First, understand the end-to-end process from ingestion to conversion to rendering the ebook to the customer. Ensure that all gaps in this process are well understood and that there are mechanisms in place to ensure that publishing partners, including independent authors, have the necessary tools and support to create and submit accessible ebooks. Next, understand the nuances of the different operating systems and leverage OS-level capabilities when appropriate. Does it make sense to leverage or integrate a tool that already exists or build a custom solution? Understand when to deviate from the OS and be self-consistent. When you want to have more control over the user experience and when you want to be able to provide more options that are relevant and specific to your customers' needs, this might be the preferred approach. Lastly, understand the needs of your customers to ensure you're focused on the right priorities and ensuring their needs are being met. In Amazon's case, this includes the needs of shoppers who are considering purchasing or borrowing a Kindle book, readers who will read those books on our apps and devices, and the content creators who are developing and submitting that content to us in the first place. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, what a wonderful series of presentations and an incredible insight into the often challenging work taking place to bring accessibility features to these reading solutions. Well, our presenters have covered a lot of ground and we'll now move into the Q&A section of the webinar. So if you have questions or comments on the content presented by Tara, Wendy and Daniel, you can use the Q&A button in Zoom to submit and we'll cover as many as possible. Okay, so the first question to our panel, and this is, so we're now seeing color e-readers coming to market, including from Kobo and Amazon. Do these provide some interesting possibilities for people with print disabilities? And are there design considerations that need to be addressed for this new category of devices? So maybe Wendy?
Sure. Yeah, color e-readers have been, I mean, super exciting. I think it's really kind of reinvigorated people's interest in e-ink devices, which, as someone who really loves them, I'm very excited to see people kind of embracing them. But adding color it's added, I think, the possibility of a lot of new features. We've seen people really embrace, particularly the annotations features and being able to highlight and interact with their content using different colors. So, now you can group your highlights, by different topics, or you can use, different pen colors to interact with your content, be that PDFs or EPUB, and it's been really exciting to watch. But on like when we think about the design and like the how we build the software and everything, there's definitely been some interesting challenges. One of the ones that I think we encountered almost right away is as we were looking at our UI and saying, okay, we're going from a purely black and white grayscale UI to now we can think about adding color. And I had to put my hand up immediately and be like, oh, but we also have to think about color contrast. And measuring color contrast is all the calculations and all the ways a color contrast is measured is designed for modern like LCD LED screens. And the colors don't quite look the same yet on e-ink. It's very, very close, but there's definitely differences, and like it depends on your front light and like how bright you've turned the front light brightness on. And so we have to be really careful around what colors we use and in what contexts. And try to test them, because sometimes you think, oh yeah, this color looks great, and it looks great on your laptop, and then you put it on the device and it's not as great as you thought it was going to look.
Great. And Tara, any thoughts from you on this?
Yeah, well, I think Wendy covered a lot of the ground I probably would have covered. We're super excited to see the new Kindle ColorSoft e-reader device. So yeah, I'm really excited about the possibilities this brings. One of our flagship Kindle reading features, which I briefly mentioned earlier, is the Kindle Reading Ruler, which utilizes, a colored overlay to, users can track their reading, stay focused line by line. You can choose from, different highlight color options. That's something that would have never been possible before on an e-ink device. And it's something that, now I'm like, oh, okay, what can we do on e-readers here, not just for Reading Ruler, but for other color support possibilities for our users to make reading more easy. So yeah, I'm super excited, but I echo a lot of Wendy's thoughts around sort of the design considerations. One other thing that kind of I remember coming up during the development of that was, where there needs to be like a black and white mode on the colored e-reader. It's like, well, if a user is opting in to purchase the colored e-reader, what is the expectation from the user at that point? Like, do we offer something in addition to the standard color? So yeah, lots of interesting things there. I didn't work directly on that at Kindle, but I'm really excited about the possibilities for accessibility.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on one. I've done evaluations with people with print disabilities coming from neurodiversity, and for many, color choice is really essential, but also there's some sensitivity to glare there as well. So the ability of having color on an e-paper type device without that glare, I think is really interesting. It'd be fun to do some demos and things there. Great. So the next question is, how do Kobo and Amazon inform customers which devices support which accessibility features? So maybe, Tara, this time we start with you.
So I'll say right now that I don't actually think we're doing a great job of informing our customers about these. We get a lot of questions around, what do you offer where? And we don't have necessarily parity for every one of our accessibility features across every one of our apps and devices. And there's so many, and there's so many different limitations and different types of capabilities depending on the surface that we're on. I mentioned just a minute ago, Reading Ruler, right, hasn't historically been available on e-readers. And I remember hearing from a customer recently who had an e-reader device. They had a dyslexic child, loved, reading ebooks, but, wrote to us and said, oh, it would be so great if you could, have the text read out to you, especially if, there's a word that you don't know how to pronounce. It would be so great if you could have some kind of, tracking device. And we said, hey, well, these things are actually available on our free Kindle reading apps. and they had no idea, and that was sort of game changing for them. And so one of the things I would like to see us do a better job at, and something that I'm going to be working on over the next year, is bringing a lot more clarity and information to our Kindle accessibility page, our Amazon accessibility hub, our detail pages, anything that would help our customers understand what's available where and why, and to help them make a more informed choice when it comes to purchasing or using our products.
Great. And Wendy, how are you doing?
Tara, yeah, Tara and I are on the same page. She said a lot of what I'm going through as well, as trying to make sure how we, that's what we're looking at currently, is also how do we best communicate the different features, the different devices, the different platforms. So we do have some information on our device store about the kind of the general accessibility features available on all of our devices currently. But we're definitely working on making sure that like future devices have, specific call outs. A definite challenge on the hardware side is some accessibility features are software based and you can send them out in an update at any time or build on them. Sometimes they're hardware dependent, and so certain devices may not actually have the hardware capability to offer certain features. A good example is like Bluetooth capability. So, making sure that we're communicating clearly, like this device has this ability, this device does not have this ability. And here's why, because I think it's important for people to understand we're not doing things for the sake of doing them. But we're also looking at, making sure that we're communicating clearly also about the book contents. And one thing I'm looking forward to doing is getting a little more deep into how the books interact with the platform. So, this book has this feature, it works on these devices. This book has this feature, it works on these other devices, just to help people make the best and most informed buying choices.
Thanks. And Daniel, turning to EDR Lab and Thorium Reader, you mentioned that accessibility was there right from the get-go. I wonder at what point you started thinking about communicating those features and how you made them discoverable for people. How have you been on that journey from the developments of Thorium?
I think it's been mostly sort of an organic growth of our contributors, by which I mean people chiming in the discussion section on our GitHub repository where we host our code. The issue tracker is there as well. There is a discussion section for people who don't necessarily want to file an issue, but just discuss, particular features, raise propose feature requests and things like that. Amongst developers, we do our internal work to reach out to people in the community. As I said, I'm myself an older member of the DAISY community, so I know a few very talented people I can reach out to, so that's quite handy. But as we recently released Thorium 3, this was during the summer, we knew we would have to put a lot of effort into revisiting our accessibility testing, specifically with screen readers, because Thorium 3 is a major departure from Thorium 2. That's why it's a major number increment, in the sense that the user interface was remodeled and rethought from our original proof of concept many years ago. So we knew we would have to make additional effort and reach out to a greater number of people to test the way we display modal dialogues, our flyout panels, in the graphical user interface, making sure that going back and forth between the publication documents and the user interface continues to work as it used to in the original version of Thorium. All of that is a ton of work, and we're a tiny team, so we always welcome external contributors. I see we have over 30 members here, so spread the word if you can, please.
Well, it makes me think that as well as the developers of the systems, of the devices and the apps, there's possibly a role for organizations such as DAISY members, and maybe publishers will want to know about this for the books, so that folk won't always know that they need to go back to, or feel that they need to go back to the developer of a platform or something like that. They may feel that the issue is with the publication itself. Sometimes it's maybe not so easy for someone to know where an issue might lie. So that brings us really to that whole kind of accessibility testing protocol and so on. So Tara and Wendy, you both mentioned epubtest.org in your presentations. And so for webinar attendees who may not be familiar with this initiative, epubtest.org provides an evaluation framework testing the accessibility features that are needed by people with different print disabilities. So there are tests included for support for screen readers on different platforms, visual adjustments, including changing the font face and the text size, the colors, and so on. And it looks at support for read aloud. And many reading system developers find these tests and the test books provided on the site really helpful. My question is, based on your user testing as developers for your different solutions and on the customer feedback you've received, are there additional features or additional accessibility support that would be helpful to include to the protocols that are there on EPUB Test? Maybe Tara, we start with you.
Sure. So first of all, we really appreciate those test books. They offer just so many different things to be included in the same ebook, and you don't often find that when you're doing some internal testing. We keep a list of, book with video, book with image, book with map, book, but having that all in one place, and book with footnotes and book with internal links and external links, like having that really allows us to be more efficient in our testing. With the latest ebook test or the latest test ebooks that came out, we're still going through those and sort of understanding what's been added and what's been changed since the earlier iterations. So I don't know that I can speak to any specific tests that are missing at this point. I do know that we're probably have worked on things and built things and put effort into bringing improved accessibility for our ebook content and our reading system that may not be coming through in some of the tests that are currently being asked about or discussed in those test books. And so one of the things I'd like to do is help inform, send back that feedback to you all so that we can make sure to include those if appropriate, and think about ways that, we're internally leveling up our accessibility support for our customers. But in the meantime, we'll continue going through and learning. And what I appreciate about those books is that it helps me understand a baseline for, what are people expecting? We augment that with what we learn about our own Kindle customers to say, okay, well, Daisy and EPUB Test and all of these, external partners are expecting this certain level of accessibility support. These are the things that our customers are expecting and wanting and looking for based on their pain points, and then kind of merging those to figure out what is going to be next on our roadmap for building.
Great, thank you, Tara. So Wendy, anything from you that needs to be added into the baseline or things to think about there?
I want to echo a lot of what Tara said because it was exactly the same on our side. I think the number one thing that is maybe missing currently in the EPUB Test suite is a fixed layout, an accessible fixed layout book to test with. This is still a huge challenge. It's very hard to make fixed layout accessible, but there are ways to make it more accessible. But finding test books to actually test whether we're able to take advantage of those features or we're properly taking advantage of the features that are there is tricky. There's just not a lot of accessible fixed layout content out there. Similar to Tara, we have a list of books that we keep that are good exemplars of some of the features that we are supporting. But sometimes when you have several million books in your catalog, it can be really hard to find a good example of something. It's not a simple search to find those books. So you either have to know about something or you have to go hunting for it. And the hunting is the really hard part. So having the test books from EPUB Test is super helpful because everything is in one book. You can test a bunch of things at the same time. You don't have to switch. Okay, so this is the book that has MathML. Okay, so this is the book that has Read Aloud. It's a lot easier to just test it all in one book.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Wendy. Well, so from reflowable EPUB to fixed layout EPUB to PDF, this question's coming to you, Daniel. It's from Raga Jopal. So the question is, does Thorium Reader support accessible PDFs?
Well, the short answer is that Thorium supports PDFs for starters, but we do delegate the rendering work to an open source library that Mozilla develops and created and still to this day maintains. Mozilla, if you're not aware, is the organization that hosts the Firefox project, the web browser. But anyway, it's a JavaScript library. We use it in Thorium to render the PDF pages. As Wendy described in her presentation, we layer on top of that our own user interface to display the table of contents and how to access pages within those fixed layout documents. But we don't do a ton of work to make the experience of reading the actual content of the PDF pages more accessible than what PDF already provides. So your question very specifically is, do we support accessible PDFs, by which I guess you're referring to the PDF documents that use a particular type of structure and that guarantee that the text flows as actual text and not just pixels on the screen. We don't do anything particular to detect that PDFs are accessible, that they comply with the accessibility specification for PDF files. I should point out, just to close in my closing comment about PDF, is that we introduced the feature in Thorium, but this is not a high priority for us. Given the size of our development team, we focus on EPUB, fixed layout, and reflowable DAISY audiobooks. But we do have on the roadmap, hopefully, some resources to upgrade our PDF support in the coming months.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. And you've provided a nice segue into the next question, which is from Manfred. This talks about audio as well. So the question is, do you see, maybe Daniel will come to you, then Wendy, then Tara. So do you see potential in supporting EPUB ebooks with media overlays in mainstream readers and apps? So Manfred mentions synchronizing text and audio is explicitly required in the European Accessibility Act for ebooks that contain audio. So Daniel, where's Thorium on this at the moment?
Pretty much from day one, not quite, but quite early on in the life of the project, we decided to implement support for media overlays. In great part because I'm myself working directly with the DAISY consortium, and as many of you are, I'm sure, familiar with DAISY audiobooks, audio only or synchronized text audio. I was able to bring that experience with me when I started working with EDR Lab on Thorium, and we were really keen working together to offer a media overlays and DAISY audiobooks experience in Thorium. So we do support it. What can I say? Oh yeah, we support it in reflowable documents as well as fixed layout. And I know there's some reading systems out there support one or the other. Just to name a very well-known example, Apple iBooks or Books app supports fixed layout media overlays. I don't think to this day that they support reflowable media overlays.
Great, thank you. Wendy, where are you at on the synchronized text and audio?
So we, similar, I guess, to Thorium and EDR Lab, we also had support for this for a very long time. However, we're in the process of actually revising a lot of our reading platforms. People who use our iOS app have probably noticed in the last year that the reading experience has changed, and it's about to change for some of our other platforms as well. So there isn't Smile support in there currently. However, it's getting added very soon. That's on the roadmap in the next couple of months to bring that back, and also to bring it in for reflowable content, because similar to Apple, we only had it for fixed layout content. It kind of worked in reflowable, but it was a bit wacky and not consistent. But we're bringing it in now for reflowable and fixed layout content across the board. The other place that we're adding it, which is probably the most exciting, is adding it to the e-reader experience. For hardware devices. We weren't able to do this for a long time, mostly because our devices didn't support audio. They didn't have Bluetooth or audio jacks or anything like that. So our devices that have Bluetooth will get this feature. And we're excited to see it. It's definitely been a long time coming. I will say, like, on the content side, we don't actually get a lot of Smile content in reflowable, which is why I think it as a feature was kind of neglected for a long time. It's one of those technically possible but not commonly used features in EPUB.
Right.
So for publishers, you know, send us more Media Overlays content. It's good stuff. But we don't get a lot of it. It's really popular, I know, in things like kids' books, which is why I got prioritized for fixed layout.
Perfect. Thank you. And Tara, how are Kindle doing on the synchronized text and audio?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, Kindle, we have our own proprietary ebook format. We don't support, or we don't render EPUBs directly, for example. Media Overlays is honestly something that I don't have a lot of experience with. What I do know and what I can say is that that audio and visual text connection is something that we have in multiple places. We support in multiple places. Most people are aware about our Audible audiobooks and our synchronized text highlighting, which we call immersion reading, allowing users to have the pre-recorded audio synchronized along with the text as it highlights as the reader is reading and listening at the same time. And of course, I mentioned previously our new read aloud feature for assistive reader, which basically takes any reflowable Kindle ebook that the user has purchased or borrowed and allows a read aloud experience, which synchronizes the text in highlights as it reads aloud in real time. So something that certain will continue digging into and working to support for all of our users to make sure that we have those multiple modalities.
Fantastic. Well, I think some very promising and optimistic answers there for Manfred in the field of reading with text and audio. And that has to be our last question. We're coming to the end of our time today. So thank you again to Tara, Wendy, and Daniel for being excellent guests in this webinar. And to remind you, in the treasure trove that is the DAISY webinar archive, you'll find more than 30 hours of video, articles, and links to resources related to accessible publishing. This webinar is the 5th event in our Countdown series, a 12-month program exploring all aspects of accessible publishing and reading, facilitating knowledge sharing and helping all involved to understand and prepare for the European Accessibility Act. So I'm happy to share the next 3 scheduled topics on November the 27th with 213 days to go. Join us for Accessibility in Practice. This webinar, designed to coincide with the European Day for People with Disabilities, will share messages from people across Europe and will learn how people read with assistive technology, what differences, often small considerations in ebook creation can make, and the impact already being experienced of recent accessibility innovations in digital publishing. We're taking a short break over Christmas and New Year, but we'll be returning on January the 22nd with 157 days to go for accessibility metadata. Well, metadata is a topic that everyday consumers easily overlook, but it provides the framework that enables the publishing industry to function. Accessibility metadata for digital publications is still a relatively new area, but one in which the European Accessibility Act and other accessibility legislation is likely to rely heavily upon. So this webinar will highlight the latest developments and best practices in accessibility metadata, showcasing how far we've come and discussing some of the challenges that remain. You can find out more information at daisy.org/webinars, where you can also sign up to the webinar announcement mailing list to learn about new topics as we add them. And if you'd like to suggest a subject or you'd like to share your perspective on the forthcoming European Accessibility Act, then please email us at webinars@daisy.org. Thank you for coming today. I hope you'll join us again next time. Goodbye.